Respected Chairman of the Chintha Ravindran Foundation, distinguished writers, my long-standing friend Sashi Kumar, who is perhaps as versatile as Chintha Ravi in the kind of things he's taken on and accomplished over decades. Distinguished writer, my junior by 1 year, I just learned, Paul Surendran, director, friends. It's a great honor to be invited, to be here at the invitation of the foundation, an invitation conveyed by my friend Sashi Kumar to give this lecture in memory of a remarkably versatile person, creative, versatile. He was interested in theory, travel. He went into filmmaking, both feature films and documentary. I learned a lot about him even today. And one thing I had met him, but didn't know him very well. But one thing I didn't know was that he was also an art critic. That's something that was new. We just visited the exhibition. And it was a great relief to know that he was not musically talented or gifted. Otherwise, you feel overawed by the versatility of someone. But above all, he was committed not just to understanding the world, but to changing it to the extent possible, primarily through the power of revolutionary thought, progressive democratic revolutionary thought. So I pay my homage to Chintha Ravi on this occasion, and note that many people do many things, but if something lasting and enduring by way of organization, which then conducts activities, if that is absent, of course, here you'd have his writings, but then the person's contribution is diminished. Whoever thought of setting up this foundation, and there must have been many admirers of Chintha Ravi, I think this foundation has done exceptional work through its various activities over the years, apart from the lecture. And I really would like to express my admiration for the foundation, which clearly distinguished writers, journalists, scholars, various others, members of the lay public are involved in this. And that's something I think very special. If my throat plays up during this lecture, it can only be blamed on a sudden decision my wife and I made. We were staying in London to go to New York and attend the FIFA World Cup final. I mention it because in Kerala, football is a passion. And so it was a good game. The Argentinians behaved disgracefully. And we were very pleased that Spain won. But it involved suddenly flying to New York and being in the air for about 17 hours, all told, to catch a connecting flight and so on. That's my excuse if my throat plays up. I discussed with Shashi about the topic, and we talked about titles for the lecture and Unmaking the Republic, how Hindutva authoritarianism is dismantling the basic structure. Let me say a few words on the title and the subtitle of this talk and the issues and questions I would like to cover during the next 45 minutes or so. The entity that figures at the center of what we are living through today is the Republic. Those who do not like or think much of the Republic and need to be reminded, they need to be reminded that it is the gift of India's freedom struggle. In the preamble to the Constitution, we, the people of India, solemnly resolve to constitute India into a sovereign, socialist, secular, democratic republic. Secular was introduced later through an amendment. That has to be noted, the fact, but from the beginning, it was clear that it was a secular constitution and therefore a secular republic. Further, the founders resolved to secure to all its citizens, and I think this is very important, justice, social, economic, and political, liberty of thought, expression, belief, faith, and worship, equality of status and opportunity, and to promote among all, and that's crucial, fraternity, assuring the dignity of the individual, and this also was added later, and the unity and integrity of the nation. The first proposition I'd like to present here is that what happens to the integrity and character of this republic, the Constitution and the Republic, matters or should matter a great deal to the people of India, across India. Secondly, if the whole set or some or indeed any of the enumerated universal values and constitutional commitments set out in the preamble are sought to be eroded or subverted by bigoted, neo-fascist and authoritarian forces, that would be, metaphorically speaking at least, the unmaking of the Republic. That's the explanation for the title. Thirdly, the practical way through which this unmaking is sought to be achieved is dismantling, not at one go, but in stages and phases, by those who are prepared to wait for the long term. Dismantling, as the opportunity presents itself, the basic structure of the Constitution. If this is allowed to happen, the Republic that came into being in January 1950 will become history, both constitutionally and politically speaking. Replacing the secular and democratic republic with a Hindu Rashtra, whatever that might mean, is a project the Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh has been working on over the past century, because that's as old as that. The RSS, founded in September 1925, claims to be a social organization dedicated to the ideal of, quote, carrying the nation to the pinnacle of glory through organizing the entire society and ensuring protection of Hindu Dharma, end quote. The reality is that its semi-fascistic ideology and authoritarian outlook, the RSS has never wavered in its commitment to bring into existence a Hindu Rashtra, whatever that might mean, because its details have not been spelled out, its contours. Its ideological core is the concept of Hindutva, which goes back, many of you know this, but for the sake of the lecture, I would like to record this, goes back to a 1923 Hindu supremacist anti-minorities tract written by B.D. Savarkar. The RSS has a structured, male-only organizational hierarchy. Its supremo, known as the Sarchang Chalak, has lifelong tenure and nominates his successor. Both Savarkar and the second supremo of the RSS, M.S. Golwalkar, admired the Nazis before the Second World War broke out. And in a notorious 1939 tract, Golwalkar applauded Hitler's Germany for keeping up, quote, the purity of the race, Golwalkar, and its culture, purging the country of the Semitic races, the Jews, and thus manifesting race pride at the highest, a good lesson for us in Hindustan to learn and profit by, end quote. The RSS has been banned thrice in history, most notably in the aftermath of Mahatma Gandhi's assassination by Nathuram Godse, a former RSS member, on January 30, 1948. It claims to have no formal membership. Its daily activities are centered on the shaka, the Sanskrit word denoting a branch, where Swayamsevaks, that is lay volunteers, meet with clock-like precision around the year to get trained and indoctrinated in the mores of Hindu Dharma, community service. I'm quoting from their official publication. Character building and the Hindu supremacist project of national reconstruction as interpreted and ordained by the RSS. But going beyond this, what the RSS has been able to do over the long haul is expand its organizational hold and ideological and political influence by floating scores of outfits and movements that worked actively in social, cultural, educational, labor, development, political, and several other fields. Collectively, these RSS-inspired outfits and movements are known as the Sangh Parivar. The RSS officially acknowledges about 36 affiliates, but a project called Seeing the Sangh, a special investigation conducted over a period of 6 years, has built a comprehensive map of the organizational affiliates of the RSS and an intensive interactive data set that has identified not just 36, but actually about 2,500 organizations with concrete, traceable material ties leading to the Sangh. The investigation, which continues, is led by Felix Paul, a lecturer in political science and international relations at the University of Western Australia. The data now housed in Science Post Center have been fact-checked and released by The Caravan, a magazine that I would like to commend on this occasion for this splendid investigative work, being in partnership with this West Australia-based research project. The project arising from and seeking to correct what the authors call a long-standing fuzziness around the organizational architecture of the Hindu far right claims to have uncovered what it calls the largest far right network in the world. Finally, so far as this issue is concerned, it won't do for us to give in to despair over what has been happening in the national political arena over the past 3 decades, and especially since 2014, when the Bharatiya Janata Party came to power on the strength of its own, breaking the pattern of some decades, its own single-party majority. We need to work hard, purposefully, unitedly, and with a conviction that there is space and opportunity to reverse the present trends, protect the basic structure, and safeguard the interests of all our people. I'll have more to say about this, about what needs to be done towards the end of my talk. The project, and Felix Paul in particular, who wrote an article in The Caravan recently, they make the point that this is not a completely unified one outlook organization. There are conflicts and contradictions between the organizations and between the various people involved in it, including the leaders. So don't be overawed by the size, the extensive network that has been built over the years. They are human and they reflect the contradictions and conflicts within society, whether it's caste-based, of course, not much about religion-based, although there are some minority members who have strayed into this fold. But they are not a single entity in the sense that they speak with one voice. Totalitarian or authoritarian organizations are often, their single-mindedness and unitariness are often exaggerated and it creates awe, wittingly or unwittingly. And this is an important point made by the authors, the people, the researchers behind this project. They make the point that a lot of the research has concentrated on the ideology, the ideas, and less on the organizational details, specifics, particularities, the scale of that, and what happens within. And I think that's an important caveat that we have to enter at this stage. Now, coming to the BJP is the mass political arm of the RSS. That's extremely well known. There may be some contradictions here or there, or a personality cult built up. But eventually it is clear that without the RSS and this extensive organizational network, as well as this authoritarian ideology, the BJP cannot function. This is at least my view. And the BJP has scored many successes. It suffered an unexpected major setback in the 2024 Lok Sabha election. Maybe some of them saw it coming, but they never admitted it. You're talking about 400 seats and they fell clearly short of a majority. But we also have to be realistic, and since then, in assembly elections, the BJP has been able to retrieve some ground politically. This goes on, and this can be left to journalists and others in the field who are covering this. But most recently, something unexpected has happened. The real founder of the Cockroach Janata Party, I won't name here, but it is not Abhijit Dipke. You can all guess who's the real founder of the certain remarks made by this gentleman in a very high forum, gave to the nation the name of cockroach and attaching it to a political party. And this has evoked a tremendous response across society. It may be a political organization in the sense that no party is behind it, or some parties may be involved, but it's not the creature of any particular party. It's a movement of the youth. We've seen it in Sri Lanka, we've seen it in Bangladesh, we've seen it in Nepal, and to some extent, at least, it's happening in India. This youth. Sonia Gandhi, in a recent article in the Hindu, I think highlights several of these issues. The article is titled, "Student Protests Are the Consequence of Modi Government's Policies." And it's not just about exam paper leaks, the compromise and corruption of the examination system. It's about joblessness, stagnant wages or salaries. It's about the loss of hope. And above all, it's the absence of accountability by those in power at the union level, and maybe in some states also. So this protest reflects a range of grievances and frustration and a loss of hope. And these youth, many of them are educated. They are certainly more educated than their parents, the previous generation was. They want to come forward. They've acquired skills, but they don't find. This is not just a problem in India. It's a problem in many countries, virtually all countries. And this is being expressed on the street. What should an intelligent government have done? It should have engaged with this early on. But in episode after episode, they do not do it. They use brutal force. The police, Sarpi has already, I think earlier, he mentioned it, we talked about it to the media outside, that brutality of the police, lathis, in attacking non-violent protesters, including women, and using pellets. And they don't own up the truth. They start to be, I think, and unfortunately, large sections of the media have conducted propaganda for the government. And there's even a petition filed with the court trying to blame the student protesters, the youth protesters, for the violence that Delhi witnessed. And what was the result? Something that started as a satirical joke, perhaps, has now ballooned. It's not, on the digital platforms, millions of followers. But on the streets, thousands come out. And it's not just in Delhi, but this is widely shared. We don't have enough information on all the protests and how it's, the numbers involved in various states, but subtly it has gone across a good part of India in some way. And then the government thought we engage with the protesters in some way. Too late. And they will not. And the focal point of the demands right now is the resignation of the Minister of Higher Education, who was a key player in the sun. And they will not. Either he cannot be touched, or they are not willing to do it for whatever reason. Maybe they'll do it. Maybe he'll be forced out. They've transferred the Secretary for Higher Education, but the minister remains unrepentant before the nation, the whole world, because it's being covered internationally also. Outrageous. And this is not the first time. You saw the protest against the Citizenship Amendment Act, the CAA of 2019. And till the COVID pandemic took over, brutal force was then used to try to suppress it. Then we saw the farmers' protests, limited to some parks. And protesters were relatively well-off farmers. It wasn't nationwide, but against brutal protests. They were very resourceful, the protesters, the farmers. And they succeeded in having the 3 farm laws seen as anti-farmer repealed. So you had examples here to show. It's a mixed record. In the case of the CAA, maybe it would have developed had there been no pandemic. But right now, the matter is before the Supreme Court for final hearings. In the case of the farm laws, the protests succeeded. And I have no doubt that the student protest, not just students, youth protest, which has now drawn support from political parties as well, will succeed in forcing the government to do at least the minimum and teaching the government, the Modi government, a lesson. This, we are pretty sure about it. They've made it clear. They're forming an organization. I think it's the duty of all those convinced that these are just causes to support it in some way, express solidarity or sympathy or support in whatever way they choose to. In this respect, political parties need to, democratic, progressive parties need to support it, but not take over this. Then that is a danger. Then it will fizzle out if they attempt to take over. We've seen it elsewhere also. What happened in Sri Lanka, what happened in Bangladesh, and what's happening in Nepal as well. These spontaneous movements are valuable, but beyond the point, unless they get organized on their own, with their own program, I think they will weaken. But I have little doubt that this particular movement, which has been inspired perhaps by protests elsewhere, I think, and also by the remark that I mentioned that these youths are coming out like cockroaches. The real founder is that person who said that. I think the government will be forced this. Now, let me quickly turn to the question of introduce the basic structure argument as a diagnostic tool to make deeper sense of the current political situation. The basic structure doctrine is arguably the most important, the most contested, and potentially the most consequential constitutional innovation that the Supreme Court of India has come up with in its 76-year history. And there is a book on this by a former distinguished, very good Supreme Court Judge, Raveendran Nariman. He came out with this book. I think for those seriously interested in this, that will be well worth reading. The basic doctrine, the structure doctrine, is also considered one of the most important judge-made constitutional laws anywhere in the world where the rule of law prevails. I think the chairman, Mr. Madhavan, touched on this, the background to this a little bit. But again, I just want to lay it out. By the early 1970s, the Supreme Court and Parliament were locked in a heated constitutional contest over the question of who holds ultimate sovereignty. Some claim that Parliament is sovereign, but it is not right because it is the Constitution that is sovereign. That's, I think, clear today. But there was a big contest in the 70s. And in Golaknath was the state of Punjab, a judgment delivered in 67. The court's 11-judge bench, led by Chief Justice K. Subbarao, held by a paper-thin 6-5 margin majority that Parliament could not amend Part 3 of the Constitution, that is fundamental rights. Fundamental rights, and that Part 3 was held to be sacrosanct. Indira Gandhi's government responded with the 24th, 25th, and 29th constitutional amendments asserting Parliament's unlimited power over Article 368 to amend any, under Article 368, to amend any provision of the Constitution. The immediate context was the perceived need to curb judicial review of land reform laws, and there Kerala figures in this contest via the 9th schedule in Article 31C, and diluting the right to property. And a 13-judge bench, the largest ever constituted by the Supreme Court of India, headed by Chief Justice S.M. Sikri, convened to hear and decide the government's case seeking to overturn Golaknath. The judges heard arguments for 68 working days. The judgment, delivered on April 24, 1973, 2 years before the emergency was promulgated, ran to more than 700 pages. There were 11 separate opinions and no single majority reasoning. The case was decided by the narrowest possible margin, 7-6, and not in the most elegant fashion. The outcome, distilled from a summary signed by 9 of the 13 judges, not all, was trailblazing. Parliament, it held, that was the summary, what emerged as a sort of, the verdict, has wide power under Article 368 to amend any part of the Constitution, including fundamental rights. This meant the overruling of Golaknath. However, and this was the crucial innovation made by the Supreme Court, the court held that this power is not unlimited. Parliament cannot use its amending power to alter or destroy the basic structure or basic features of the Constitution. In other words, the Constitution can be amended but not repealed, and the amending power cannot be used to change the constitutional fundamental idea, identity, or character. And this is the key thing about the Republic, unmaking about the Republic, that you cannot alter the fundamental character and identity of the Constitution and therefore the Republic. This naturally raises the question, what is basic structure? The majority understandably and quite wisely, I think, declined to produce an exhaustive, close list. Different judges cited different elements: supremacy of the Constitution, not Parliament; the Republican and democratic form of government, no monarchy here; secularism; separation of powers between the legislature, executive, and judiciary; federalism; the sovereignty and unity of India; and the dignity of the individual, secured by fundamental rights. And later judgments added to and refined the list. And this included free and fair elections, judicial review, the rule of law, and the balance between fundamental rights and directive principles of state policy. I mention this because this open-endedness is interesting. The basic structure doctrine is not a fixed code, but a judicially administered standard. And that is why Hindutva authoritarianism is attacking the basic structure. That is the gap that it perceives, because it is judicially administered standard, so it depends on the character of the judiciary, its independence, its capability to stand up to executive pressure, particularly from Hindutva authoritarianism, which is ruthless, which is relentless, also tries to pack the judiciary. refuses to appoint judges recommended by the collegium. That system may be imperfect, but executive appointment is probably worse, as we saw during the period of Indira Gandhi when they talked of packing the judiciary, a committed judiciary and all that. So this is a gap that is perceived. Critics have long argued that this makes the doctrine inherently indeterminate and rests enormous, essentially unreviewable discretion in unelected judges to decide what is basic. And the charge has never fully gone away. And as I mentioned, it is an open secret that the RSS, with its Hindutva ideology and Hindu Rashtra project, has long regarded the constitution adopted on January 26, 1950 as unsuitable for a Hindu majority country. So the basic structure doctrine stands in the way of what the RSS and the entire Sangh wants to achieve. But when it comes to amending the constitution, it is the open-endedness, a perceived vulnerability in the basic structure doctrine that the RSS's mass political arm, the BJP, and the union government it leads, has been and will be targeting. It's been already targeting it. You saw it in what happened when the state of Jammu and Kashmir was basically chopped up into two union territories, and the status that it enjoyed earlier was just done away with through executive action, parliamentary action, first executive action. It did not go through any amending process, and the Supreme Court didn't do anything about it. The Indian judiciary has come under enormous pressure. I already mentioned that, from BJP-led or BJP governments at the center and in states. This is not the first time we have seen political attempts to overall control and influence the judiciary, including the highest court in the land. And I already mentioned Prime Minister Indira Gandhi's push for a committed judiciary. However, it would be no exaggeration to state that the Hindutva authoritarian regime's relentless and deep-going efforts to erode the independence of the judiciary, which is itself a key element of the basic structure, that these are qualitatively different and present a greater danger to the Republic. I must qualify this by noting that there are several independent judges and independent benches of the superior judiciary, especially the high courts, who resist this relentless pressure and deliver sound and unimpeachable judgments that are in line with the basic structure documents. We don't have the time to go into various issues that have figured in this respect, but I'll cite some illustratively. Electoral integrity, the reshaping of the electorate and the union itself, media freedom, federal and civil society space, and judicial response. And in each case, they can debate the question whether there is a legitimate exercise of state power operating within constitutional limits, or is it corroding either all or some or at least one key element of the basic structure doctrine as held by the Supreme Court. Now, electoral integrity. Let's start with that first, because that concerns us. Elections have been held in some key states recently, with different outcomes. And before that, there was the Special Intensive Revision, SIR. This could be a case study. Free and fair elections are at the very center of the basic structure doctrine. In Article 324, vests the Election Commission of India with the constitutional duty to conduct them, free and fair elections. When that machinery that maintains electoral rolls becomes the site of contestation, we are now close to the core of the basic structure doctrine. And as everyone knows, in 2025, the Election Commission of India launched what it called the Special Intensive Review. This was a countrywide, phase-wise re-verification of electoral rolls. It began with Bihar and then extended to other poll-born states, including West Bengal, Assam, Tamil Nadu, Kerala, Puducherry. ahead of the 2026 Assembly elections. The stated justification was the presence of illegal immigrants, particularly in the border states, who had allegedly obtained voter documentation improperly. The opposition, the left, the Congress, the Trinamool Congress, the DMK, and others read it differently. They read it as a mechanism timed and targeted that would disproportionately strip voters from constituencies and communities unfavorable to the ruling party. This has already happened in the state of Assam and in the Union Territory of Jammu and Kashmir, where totally illogical, unreasonable changes have been made in this regard. And with no rhyme or reason, they have removed a lot of eligible voters from the voting list. The numbers deserve our close attention because they're not small. In the Bihar pilot alone, 4.7 million electors were removed from the rolls. When the exercise went national, the Commission deployed a mapping algorithm to link current voters back to decades-old rolls. This was ridiculous because the algorithm red flagged some 3.66 crore voters nationally for what were termed logical discrepancies. This was a technical problem, technical flaw. It was an incompetent system using this algorithm. There were misplaced personal names, implausible age gaps, and similar artifacts of imperfect record keeping, which cannot be blamed on the voters, but rather on the system, stretched across generations. In West Bengal alone, 1.31 crore voters were caught in the net. In Madhya Pradesh, it has been reported in the press, nearly 40% of the entire draft roll, that is 2.35 crore voters, were flagged. Much of the West Bengal chaos traced to faulty transliteration software, converting Bengali script names into English and then failing to recognize a citizen's own spelling of his or her name. And I want to pass on to another grave issue. The SIR process in West Bengal has been associated with reported suicides among voters who feared being erased from the dictatorship roles of their own democracy, and among booth-level officers, BLOs, crushed by the impossible administrative timeline. But that is not all. Shockingly, in May 2026, the Supreme Court of India upheld the legal validity of the SIR, holding it consonant with the Representation of People Act and within the Commission's constitutional mandate under Article 324. The court did not seem to give any weight to either to the concrete design of the SIR or its practical effects of a supposedly independent, neutral administrative exercise, because the tools were defective, the timelines were compressed, and they disproportionately targeted minorities and the poor, not just minorities, but also in many cases the poor. This is something that has to be, it's a work in progress, and we have to continue to follow this. And this is clearly an attack on free and fair elections and the right of citizens to exercise their franchise. Then you have another very big project called delimitation. And the Hindu recently brought out this book. Yesterday, in fact, it was launched. And I have pleasure in presenting a copy to the chairman of the Chintha Ravindran Foundation, because I know he'll read it. He's a lot of administrative experience and legal knowledge. He served in high positions and is also a writer. And I hope this will be of some use to you. And nobody disputes the fact that delimitation is part of the Constitution. There's nobody who disputes that. It's clearly in the Constitution. It's linked to population after every census. But wisely in the past, the constitution makers did not expect such disparities to emerge and the gap to widen between one region of India and another, and particularly for the southern states, which are starting with Kerala, but also Tamil Nadu, and then the other southern states, all the southern states, they took what is called family planning and earlier called population control very seriously. And it's not just their policies that delivered the outcomes, not just the population control policies. It was also development, socio-economic development. And everywhere in the world, you see that when people's living standards improve, women start getting an important part of the workforce. Naturally, the total fertility rate declines. It's a natural process, an organic process. And this has happened here, whereas the constitution makers assumed, I think, or maybe didn't give much thought to this question of the divide between Hindi-speaking India in particular and other parts of India with respect to population growth, the fertility rate, what is called TFR, total fertility rate, so on. This is going to be an issue. I don't want to go into the details of it. There's a whole sequence of steps that preceded this. The delimitation exercise that has been announced. Of course, we know that the three bills, the Constitution Amendment Bill, the Delimitation Bill, and one for Union Territories, they're all, the package was defeated because they couldn't get the 2/3 majority. They're still trying to bring it back with support. I don't know. They don't have the numbers at the moment, but they're trying hard. But the whole idea is to get more seats for per vote. That's the whole project. The BJP and the Hindutva authoritarianism wants to score heavily, get a higher yield, if you like, from the votes they receive in states like Bihar, Uttar Pradesh, Madhya Pradesh, Rajasthan, and elsewhere in these states, and also in some other states. As opposed to South India, where the BJP's footprint, Hindutva's footprint, it's much smaller. Maybe in Karnataka and elsewhere, they're active enough, but they've not made much headway, certainly not in Tamil Nadu, certainly not in Kerala, although they're hyperactive here, I know that. And Andhra Pradesh, they don't matter very much, Telangana, and so on. So this has become a huge issue. And the two arguments is, one is we go by the Constitution. But why did the Vajpayee government not go by the Constitution? What is laid down there? Political sense prevailed at that time when they decided on the freeze 25 years. So in Tamil Nadu, the lead was taken by then Chief Minister M.K. Stalin. A high-level committee on union-state relations was constituted under the chairmanship of a very distinguished retired Supreme Court judge, Justice Kurian Joseph, and very experienced retired IAS officer, Haswa Kriti, and a scholar. And it's come out with part one, what I regard as an excellent report. It's been published by Bloomsbury, and those interested in this subject, I think, should certainly do that. But I want to just go into the conclusion of the first part of this report. And I quote, "The post-2026 delimitation exercise is generating profound anxiety in India for several interconnected constitutional reasons. First, orders of the Delimitation Commission acquire the force of law with far-reaching consequences, yet they are made by an unelected body that is insulated from executive and legislative supervision. This Delimitation Commission, once it's constituted, will not be supervised either by the executive, of course, will try to influence it, but formally not, and certainly not supervised by the legislature or parliament, subject only to severely limited judicial review. Some judgments have held that in a limited way the judiciary can look at this. The design, though meant to prevent partisan manipulation originally, raises legitimate concerns of democratic accountability. When they make the point that the total fertility rates, TFRs across Indian states, remain sharply divergent. I already mentioned this. Lifting the interstate freeze on seat allocation under such conditions would significantly alter the federal balance. They will reward states that have not achieved population stabilization, that have not done well in terms of socio-economic development. Per capita income could be an indicator of that. There's a huge divide between what prevails in the advanced southern states and, say, Bihar or even Uttar Pradesh. Penalizing states that have done well, penalizing success, rather than rewarding it, providing incentives to it. And states that have implemented national population goals will get punished because their share in parliament, particularly the Lok Sabha, will decline, at least relative to the gains made by states that have not done well. And secondly, this report, part one of the report, makes an interesting point that India lacks a meaningful federal counterweight. In the United States, for example, or in other federations, in the US, representation in the Senate is not decided according to population. 2 seats per state, big and small, California being huge, or New York and Washington, D.C. Regardless of population, this offsets population-based disparities in the House of Representatives. In India, unfortunately, the Rajya Sabha is also broadly structured on population lines under the 4th schedule. Therefore, it is a near replica of the Lok Sabha, according to this report. This is a structural weakness. I don't think we are going to remedy it in the near future, but it has to be noted. And the recommendation made by the high-level committee on union interstate relations in part 1 of its report are the following. And it's a very radical recommendation. They say the recommendations are unified by a single organizing principle, namely accountable federal equilibrium. The interstate freeze on seat allocation, don't be shocked by this, should be extended until 2126, 100 years from now, as a constitutional settlement, while permitting periodic intrastate boundary readjustments. Within the states, there have to be readjustments. And this can also be manipulated. It's called gerrymandering, named after a particular governor in the United States who specialized in this, later became vice president, but he's remembered not for anything except for the term gerrymandering. That is, manipulating constituencies, populations within a particular constituency in your and within the state or the region in your favor, doing it fraudulently, using political power or legislative authority to do this. It's called gerrymandering. Without gerrymandering, I think these adjustments are necessary. And then the report goes on to say that the delimitation process must be democratized without politicization through structured legislative scrutiny, reasoned responses by the Delimitation Commission, and carefully staged judicial review. And this accountable federal equilibrium, I think, is a very important thing in the basic structure. And this is a huge issue before us because it's clear that they delayed the census much well after the pandemic ended, the COVID pandemic ended, in order to get an advantage in the 2029 election, Lok Sabha election. And this is a project that they have been pursuing assiduously. First, the CAA, targeted largely at the Muslim minority, in border states, but also affecting the poor and the deprived very seriously in many states. We saw the nightmare of what happened in the NRC in Assam, the National Register of Citizens. Then you had the National Population Register, and then the CIA. That came first. And then you have SIR depriving millions of voters of their franchise, because there were some remedial procedures offered, but they were not satisfactory. And a lot of voters who are citizens who have exercised their franchise in earlier elections were denied this opportunity. And now, staring us in the face is the prospect of a delimitation commission. It looks like it is not feasible in the time left before 2029. The census processes have already started for 2027, but there is not enough time after the census results come out for a delimitation commission to do its job. So that is a bit of a relief, but we cannot be sure. Meanwhile, they're trying to push through the bills saying 50% increase, or it could be 25% increase, freeze it now. But there's a crucial change that is there. In future, Parliament can decide by simple majority. There's no need for a constitutional amendment to decide which census it will be based on. And I think, fortunately for us, political parties, and here I can claim that the Hindu can take some credit from it, along with some other media organizations, but mainly we did it, I think, saw through it, and the rulers were not very pleased with what appeared in the media on this. I think on this alone, the intelligent and responsible sections of the media, I think, have done quite well in helping people understand what the delimitation project of the present union government is all about. And this is an important part. So far as the CAA is concerned, it attacked one key element of the basic structure, secularism. For the first time in the history of the Republic, religion became a marker for acquiring citizenship. These were largely confined to the boundary states, Bangladesh, those who came from Bangladesh, mainly Bangladesh, Afghanistan and Pakistan. Muslims were not given this protection, not given this opportunity, under the fiction that Muslims come here for Muslim, they're called non-Muslim Hindus who have come over illegally are called refugees, and Muslims who have come over illegally from these states without formal papers and so on are called interlopers, are called illegal migrants. And some strong words were used even by a Supreme Court judge. They were called pests and so on. This is unfortunate. But the point is that for the first time in the history of the Republic, religion was used as a marker for who is eligible to get citizenship. Because the fiction was that all migrants who came in, illegal migrants as they were called, who came in from boundaries, across the boundary, where if you are Hindu or Buddhist or Sikh, later on they added Christians in order to isolate Muslims. Then you came here either because of persecution or the fear of persecution. But any Muslim who came over, this is a ridiculous fiction, came here for economic or other dubious reasons to cross the boundary illegally. And this, although it was meant to target particular groups of people, the process itself could become a nightmare. And there is a great deal of fear, not perhaps much in Kerala, where the Muslim population is quite high, but in various other parts, I've known Muslim friends to express great anxiety about who would be taken off the rolls and who would be included. I don't think that fear is somewhat exaggerated. I think but it's something to be watched. So you have the whole package coming together. First, the Citizenship Amendment Act, along with the NRC and the NPR. Then you have SIR, and now delimitation. The final topic or issue I want to mention is federalism, state rights. I don't have to go into a great detail here. This happened earlier during Congress rule also, when elected state governments were dismissed. Fortunately, thanks to the Bombay judgment of the Supreme Court, that was somewhat mitigated. Dismissal becomes more difficult. But in various ways, this centralization, this authoritarian centralization has picked up pace since 2014, when the BJP came to power on a single party majority. And states, there's simply no time to go into all that has happened between the center and the union. We have a lot of evidence in Tamil Nadu, in Kerala, in Karnataka, where the BJP has not been in power, and how governors behave. The competition is who's the worst governor in India. We used to score them. Sometimes your governor was, I used to speak publicly on it. Governor Ravi was one of the worst. Arif Muhammad Khan, who came from the opposition camp, was one of the worst. So it's a competition between who is willing to ride roughshod over constitutionally laid down rights of states. Remember that the Constitution characterizes India as a union of states. It's a union of states. It's not center. It's a union level is union government. The union level, union of states. Even if there is not full-fledged federalism here, federalism is part of the basic structure of the Constitution. The states are held to be sovereign in their own rights. Dr. Ambedkar mentioned this in the Constituent Assembly debates. When this question, there were people who raised questions about over-centralization, the unitary tendency in the Constitution itself. The Constitution has flaws in this respect, but it has been made much worse by practice over the years, first by the Congress governments, and later on by, of course, the Hindutva authoritarian project. So this is a major issue, whether it's a development scheme. Don't name it. If you don't name it after the Prime Minister, I won't give you the money. Allocation, clear preference for states ruled by the BJP or parties that are in alliance with the BJP, such as Andhra Pradesh today. And this is what is going on between the center and the states. While the Supreme Court delivered a very important judgment on the role of the governor, governors, exercising the pocket veto or absolute veto, subsequently a reference to the Supreme Court said that the governor can't prescribe a timeline. But as far as I know, I'm not a lawyer, the judgment prevails. They've laid down a timeline for the governor to give a decision. A two-member bench came up with a good judgment, but the practical effects are not yet clear. So it's an ongoing process. I think I would like to sum up by saying that the Hindutva ideology has gone quite deep, but it has also been driven back in some important political arenas. We saw it in Uttar Pradesh. We saw it in Maharashtra earlier during the Lok Sabha election, subsequently reversed. We saw it in southern states. Therefore, it is important not to feel despondent. We have seen authoritarian governments before. Paul and I, and Sashi Kumar also, and Mr. Madhavan, we have lived through the emergency. We have seen what happens and how quickly it was overthrown, fortunately peacefully. But those who came in their place made a mess of it. That's another story. But political history or history teaches us that these authoritarian forces have a limited lifespan. They can go on. I don't want to underestimate this. That is why I mentioned this new research, this project by called Seeing the Sun, which has identified this vast network and is an ongoing project. But it also highlights the internal fissures, contradictions, conflicts. Don't see it as a unified whole. And sooner or later, I hope that much of India, including key Hindi-speaking states, will learn from the experience of Kerala, from the experience of Tamil Nadu, from the experience of Karnataka, from the experience of Andhra Pradesh, and from the experience of Telangana, that we have a forward-looking way to offer you whatever the faults, whatever the corruption involved in the system. This is an important region of India. Also, there are others that have resisted this tide of Hindutva and this attempt to put in place in stages and phases the Hindu Rashtra regime, whatever that may mean in the future. And I don't want to give any false hope, but I really believe that there is opportunity and space to fight back this semi-fascist movement, this authoritarian movement, this movement that militates against key elements of the basic structure. It's a very important, even though it was an inelegant judgment, which is not signed by all the judges. It is a judgment, that's the law in place, the constitutional law in place. I think it's and it's not just in legal terms. We have to fight for it politically, basic structure politically and constitutionally also. And I think this is a safeguard, despite the inelegant way in which it came into being. And I hope that we'll be able to resist the continuing efforts and roll it back. And when it comes to the 2029 election, there's a good chance to see what's happening in Delhi and elsewhere, that this dark chapter in India's history can be put an end to, at least by 2029, not just the election, but around that date. Thank you.